Hello everybody, my name's Simon Pimenta. Today I want to do an interview with Rob Salter. Rob is a client or someone I did work with, but I think his story is an interesting one. So I make no claims about the training that Rob's done. This is just one person's story. So Rob, hello there, how are you?
I'm good. Good to speak to you again.
Good. And just tell everyone where you are in the world right now.
I'm in North London.
Right.
I work as a physio in central London, but I live in leafy Muswell Hill near Highgate.
Right. Excellent.
At the moment, anyway. Originally hailing from the north.
Right. Okay. So we'll find out a bit more about you and what you're doing right now. But for now, I just want to talk to you about the background of, your health challenges. So tell us a little bit about that. When did you get sick?
So I got sick first in terms of like a viral fatigue would have been 2009. Would have been actually roughly almost this time of year. It was June 2009. I did a half marathon in St Albans, fairly hot day, no kind of after effects. And then about 3 days later came down with some kind of fever. Or felt very tired in the gym on the Wednesday night, and then woke up with a terrible fever in the night, which was actually at the time of the swine flu outbreak. I don't know whether you remember. That was in 2009. Now, obviously, I felt pretty grim, but called up NHS Direct or whatever it was, and they gave them the symptoms, and they said, no, it's not swine flu, just rest. And so I just rested, and then I suppose probably spent a couple of days in bed, and then had a few days after that where I didn't feel great, but just kind of, did usual moping around. And then actually about a week later, kind of felt, relatively normal. I mean, I don't remember feeling particularly run down. So I just went back to kind of, normal exercise. I do a lot of running. I probably was running 4, 5, 6 times a week, and had gone out on a day when it was particularly warm. I did a kind of fairly hard 50-minute run, and I got back. I remember because I had to train someone at the gym. I was a personal trainer at the time.
Right.
And I got back to my flat and I felt odd, as in very, very extremely tired, and just a kind of a little bit out of sync, and just thought, well, that's a bit strange. So I went to the gym and trained this guy, and the whole time I remember thinking, this is a bit strange. And then really it was from that night onwards, I kind of developed what would be symptoms synonymous with kind of post-viral fatigue, really.
Right.
So kind of muscle ache, nausea post-exertional, kind of really susceptible to bright light, all sorts of kind of strange symptoms. I remember having pins and needles from my kind of shin down, or shins, and also from my wrists down, which was a really odd feeling.
Yeah.
And then I had kind of terrible insomnia as well. I had really bad insomnia. It was almost like all the wires had been pulled out. So then effectively that went on for about, I suppose, 4 months, 5 months. Went to the GP, was given no real kind of insight into what it might be. Had all the kind of normal blood tests, and everything was ruled out, including glandular fever. There was a negative. Ultimately just kind of carried on working. I suppose I was able to walk about everywhere. I just didn't feel great. I just didn't feel very well. Yeah. But then gradually kind of things slowly improved. And I suppose this was June, by about October, I was back kind of starting to do some running again, end of September, early October, and kind of recovered, really. Kind of felt pretty good. And got back to normal running, and actually then subsequently went on to do a couple more marathons. So I kind of made what you would call like a full recovery, and kind of didn't really think anything more of it. So I had kind of gone from this experience of having this kind of what you would say post-viral fatigue to then recovering and doing some more marathons. I vaguely remember at the time of doing the next couple of marathons of having kind of a few dips here and there. Probably for the reasons I got sick in the first place, probably because I just wasn't resting properly. I was burning the candle at both ends, but I didn't have any kind of major crash, if you like. But I always got the sense that there was something kind of not quite right there.
Right.
And I think that was basically, because I was doing a lot of kind of heavy exercise, and then still having kind of, heavier nights out that I used to have that I obviously don't have anymore. But like I said, recovered pretty much, and was back to kind of being, doing what I was doing in terms of running and doing marathon training and the rest of it. And so, yeah, so that would have been kind of 2011. And then obviously I moved up to Newcastle in 2012 to retrain as a physio. And like I said, I'd get the odd week where I was a bit tired and I would get the kind of a bit brain foggy, but there was never any major collapse. And up in Newcastle, I was fine doing my running. I was doing lots of fell running in the Lake District. And actually, the real crash was in my final year at university. I had a winter bug. I probably had a fairly decadent weekend, Christmas period in my final year going out because of the stress of the course. I was back down in London, and I think, so I probably had quite a lot of fun in brackets. And then I got a winter bug, kind of would have been early January time.
So this was what year?
This was now 2015. So effectively, I'd recovered in 2011, 2012 after a few blips.
Yeah.
And then I had the kind of major crash in very early 2015. Had a decadent Christmas of partying, going out, drinking. Had a winter bug of some sort. Felt like I'd recovered from that, and then went to doing a couple of races that in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have run. Really, I was probably kind of very low on very high stressful environment in terms of my course, because obviously I was in my final year, so I probably didn't have a huge amount of reserve, and it was almost like the various camels that kind of broke the camel's back. Really, it was got a winter bug, ran a couple of races when I probably shouldn't have done, very stressful course, final year, dissertation, the rest of it. And basically the body just went, no, I can't really handle that really. So that's when I developed the symptoms I'd had previously. And really in that point, just couldn't really pull out of it. And things obviously then deteriorated from there really. So that was in my final year at university, doing physiotherapy. So I had the kind of post-viral fatigue, recovered, albeit with a couple of mini setbacks, but had basically got back to full health. Moved to Newcastle, was fine for most of the time up there. And then it was in my final year in 2015 that I had the real crash, which looking back was probably kind of, it's easy to look back now, was probably always on the cards, given, what I'd been doing in terms of my lifestyle and the kind of, the levels of stress that university was inducing, and also thinking about getting a job and all those things that you think about when you start a new career. And you throw in other things like, high exertional exercise and a winter bug, and it's just too much for the body essentially.
Yeah. And that's interesting to me, because sometimes when I talk to people, they are aware of some of the factors that may have contributed to them getting sick. But some people aren't. Some people say, I don't really know why I got sick. But when I talk to them and start finding out a bit more about their story, it starts to become clear to me and to them, why they might have got sick. And is there anything else that you'd say that was a contributory factor? You mentioned sort of burning the candle at both ends. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
I used to go out clubbing a lot in London, lots of late nights. And I think I probably mixed that with kind of high endurance exercise.
Yeah.
And basically just probably didn't give myself enough recovery between doing the two. It's not, if you go out and you have a heavy weekend and then you go out and run, 13 miles on a Wednesday afternoon or whatever it was, because I was doing I was doing kind of marathons back then.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I wasn't always kind of completely reckless, but I probably didn't give myself enough recovery. And I think basically I was pulling the body in two different directions. And, people always used to laugh that I used to kind of have this kind of fairly hedonistic kind of going outside and then this kind of marathon side.
Right.
And I think in some ways, I probably looking back, probably knew that it was probably going to come back to bite me at some point.
Yeah.
Because it's just the nature of, you can probably do it for so long, but actually as you get older and as you do it, I was probably on a little bit of a downward, trend.
Yeah.
lack of sleep, the rest of it, and just generally kind of pushing the body quite hard. And ultimately, and then you throw in, characteristics of stress. I've always used exercise as a way of, to relax. And, that probably hid various aspects of maybe anxiety of dealing with day-to-day life or career or all those kind of things. And I probably used exercise as a way of dealing with that. And so that probably masked, fairly high levels of anxiety in certain areas of life. Not that I was ever particularly depressed. I mean, I was kind of upbeat and kind of going about business, but I think exercise probably hid a kind of fairly high levels of stress in certain ways.
Yeah.
And when you put that with, kind of lifestyle factors and exercise, if there's an underlying issue of stress, then you're, as obviously with your training, we talked about the fight or flight stuff. The situation was, the environment was probably ripe for something like this to happen eventually.
Yeah.
I was probably kind of walking a bit of a tightrope, on a kind of very narrow ridge. And, unfortunately, you can kind of do that for so long. And then eventually the body says, do you know what? I think I kind of need to give you a bit of a warning here. That
Absolutely.
You can't really keep doing this.
Yeah.
Because you're knackered, basically, and you need to take some time off.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I guess, because we don't always know, the body's giving us these warnings, but we don't necessarily know how to read them or what they mean. And so we can override them rather than actually listen and think, okay, my body is telling me something here. Certainly that's something I did. Okay, so what did you think was wrong at the time? Did you have any idea,
You mean the first time?
The second time when...
So the second time it was funny actually, because I always had the feeling in the back of my mind that there was almost like a fuse that could... I was always worried because I'd had some mini relapses after the first post-viral fatigue of kind of 2 to 3 weeks occasionally, where I was a bit brain foggy and didn't feel great. But there was always a little bit of a fear in the back of my mind that, when the fuse properly goes, what situation am I going to be dealt with, and that was always a bit of a worry. But it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I almost thought this is probably going to happen at some point. I don't know why. It's kind of maybe just a gut feeling that I had. Even though my time up in Newcastle was a lot kind of more settled in terms of kind of social life and things like that. Partly because I was working, but obviously having had post-viral fatigue and then looked at the kind of symptoms of CFS-ME, when I really relapsed properly in January 2015 and through into kind of February, March, when it really didn't look like it was picking up at all, because normally I'd had that kind of bounce back after maybe 4 weeks, and actually it was getting worse. So for example, I would try and go for like a 20-minute run, which would be kind of meat and drink normally, and I'd kind of be able to propel myself along the road. Physically, it wouldn't necessarily feel great, but then I would feel terrible for kind of 3 days afterwards.
Right.
And that started to kind of set off alarm bells, really. I kind of started to think, this is starting to kind of, this isn't like this is something deeper. I think this is something more entrenched in terms of, an illness. But then I kind of still thought, well, it's only a few months. But I think the difficulty is that I was in a situation where I was doing a challenging degree. I was thinking about job interviews. Where am I going to, all these kind of things. So the nature of the stress, I kind of had that concern that actually would I be able to bounce back this time, because I was aware of how much stress I was under.
Yeah.
And so it was probably at that point where I thought I was, I probably had something along the, under the umbrella of chronic fatigue. And then you start looking up, well, how do people recover from this and how long is it going to go on for? And it was probably when I got to the summer. I mean, I got through my degree and I got a high class honour. I did really well in it, but I kind of dragged myself through it really. And it was when I kind of got to, June time, which was when I graduated, June, July, and I had kind of better days, but essentially I wasn't really getting any better. And I really started to worry then, because I thought, well, I'm going into a job which is essentially going to be physical, working on the wards of a hospital. And at the moment I can't walk for, I'm kind of getting symptoms if I walk for 35 minutes or 30
Right.
minutes,
Right.
you know. And I think probably at a time where I should have been kind of celebrating a good degree and making this, you know, achieving this great thing of going back and becoming a physio, actually it was a pretty crap summer, because obviously I was getting more and more stressed thinking about my inability really to be able to potentially do my job. And so that basically then caused more stress. So
Yeah.
the build up to eventually getting the job at UCLH where I am now, and thinking about the move over the summer, it was just became a kind of, you know, the kind of an addition with more stress, thinking about starting a new career when basically I was knackered. You know, I was completely knackered. I couldn't really do any exercise. I was completely riddled with stress. And it was kind of it was a really difficult time, I have to say. It was really, I was, you know, the stress levels were completely off. You know, I didn't have the physical resilience, and I didn't have any mental resilience either.
Right.
And I was kind of faced with working at a kind of massive hospital in London in a new career, and I, you know, kind of almost feeling like I had one arm tied behind my back, really.
Right.
So you just kind of get on with it, don't you? You think, well, what do you do? There's no other choice, really. I've just got to kind of do it. But like I said, I think it was at that point where I pretty much realised I was under the umbrella of kind of ME, chronic fatigue, and had been referred to the NHS service, which, you know, was helpful to a degree. It was through their blood tests that they said that I had glandular fever.
Right.
So that kind of cleared that up.
So you had it the second time.
So basically, they said they said that I blood tests showed that it had been and passed the system. They couldn't say when.
Right.
It was more than likely the fever that I had in 2009. That's what the consultant said. But they put me on a program of graduated exercise. That I was referred to an exercise physiologist who was actually great. She was really good. I mean, she was very interesting, and she helped me kind of devise a few programs. But I never really kind of, and we talked about this, I never really kind of got the whole graduated exercise, because I thought, well, I can see the principle of it, but it's almost like it's written for someone who doesn't have chronic fatigue. Because I know if I do a time, you know, like a day's work, and I feel terrible, if I come home and try and go out for a half-hour walk or try a jog or whatever the case may be, I'm going to feel even worse for another 3 days.
Yeah.
So it just never really kind of, you know, they were very nice and they were helpful. I never had any CBT training or anything like that. I had the consultation with the exercise physiologist, but that never really kind of got to grips with anything, to be honest. She was good, she was helpful, but I just never felt that it was really dealing with the issue. And even then, I was probably looking at it from a kind of biomedical point of view. Obviously, I was aware of kind of stress being a factor, but I didn't really grasp the kind of consequence that stress might have in terms of energy production. I was kind of, because I wasn't really getting any better. We tried different things. I mean, I was being diligent, going to the gym and doing, you know, yoga. And I think a lot of this helped. I was doing, you know, I devised a lot of my own exercise by doing weight training with kind of long rests in between. So that was helping. And it probably did help towards getting me better. But ultimately, I never really had made that connection between, you know, high levels of stress and just, you know, all the thinking about being run down, all the stuff that causes more stress, and the kind of the way to recovery, really. So I'd been referred to the NHS, but it just never really kind of got me anywhere, to be honest. And I just kind of battled through it in the first, I mean, I suppose for 6 months. I started would have been October 2015. I felt basically terrible for 6 months, to the point, you know, I was literally would go to work, come in and just kind of lie down, really, or just think, oh my God, how am I going to get through the next day? Second 6 months were basically, you know, I felt grim, but it was kind of manageably grim.
Right.
You know, just dealing day in, day out with kind of muscle ache, that kind of terrible brain fog where you're almost thinking about things. And people who watch this who've had kind of chronic fatigue or forms of this, this will resonate with them, where you're kind of looking at things almost in the third person. It's one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. And actually, I just got used to it.
Yeah.
But looking back, it was a really kind of, it was a full on impairment, really.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing of kind of that kind of poisoned feeling, muscle ache, almost a sense of feeling hungover, developing cold symptoms, days where you felt like someone had just emptied the energy tap from your side and everything would just drain out. Doing that on top of doing a job where you're kind of getting people in and out of bed and, manual stuff on the ward, that was very, very tiring and obviously very, very difficult for really 6 months and then really a year, to be honest.
Right. Okay.
So yeah.
And what else did you try and get your health back?
So I did loads of reading. I read Dr. Myhill's book, which actually was great in terms of looking at mitochondrial function. And I invested loads of time into that. Did loads of reading up on the kind of Krebs cycle and the way that energy is produced, ATP, production of ATP and recycling, and then looking at, and which nutrients you need. And so basically for a long time, I invested quite a lot of money in supplements.
Yeah.
I was taking magnesium for this and sprays of this and all sorts of stuff. And I mean, looking back, it may have helped a bit, but I never felt I got any kind of major bounce from it.
Yeah.
And then I actually contacted a doctor privately who's under ecological medicine, works down near kind of Harley Street area, who's under the kind of bracket of Dr. Myhill, and went and had a consultation. Spoke to her, and she looked at my past medical history. I'd had kind of infections in Tanzania, malaria, and various things, and I spoke about my hedonistic lifestyle back in the day. And she went down the route of looking at diet basically,
right.
And supplements, and she put me on a very kind of strict diet. I remember I had to fill out my do a food diary, and she basically put yellow through all these different things, and I thought, blimey, God, it's going to be an interesting few weeks. I can't have this, I can't have that.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I thought I had a relatively healthy diet. I don't smoke, don't drink a huge amount, I don't take anything else. Generally was living pretty healthily, and I kind of thought, well, so I tried, and then she kind of cross-checked it again, and her assumption was basically that there was an underlying health issue related to infections previously. Obviously, the glandular fever had flicked a switch and caused the, being a kind of entry into the fatigue. But essentially, the way to recover was through supplements and dietary changes. And the problem I had with that through this whole thing was actually I felt that actually adhering to this diet was actually more stressful than it was relaxing.
So what sort of things were you cutting out? What sort of things were you eating?
Well, she was no kind of refined products whatsoever. I couldn't have orange juice. I couldn't have, really, it was very, very strict. I wouldn't go it wasn't as far as a kind of paleo diet, where you can't have, where it's just protein. But
yeah,
I just found it was it was basically cutting out bread. I wasn't really eating a huge amount of bread anyway. I wasn't eating a huge amount of pasta or rice, so that wasn't difficult. But it was just a very, very strict diet, and I'd have like a cup of cocoa, and she'd say, well, you can't really have that, and it was just a little bit. And then through the whole thing, and I think I could see what she was coming at, but it was almost like she'd seen a clinical picture. This is how I felt about it. She'd seen a clinical picture with past medical history, glandular fever, so the malaria, the glandular fever, and put the kind of dietary stuff with it, and said that this is why I had fatigue. And my whole issue with it, or I say issue, the thing that was kind of going on in the background for me was, well, why if it was a dietary issue, did I not get sick before? Because I've been eating like this for years.
Yeah.
And that's where I was kind of confused with it. Something didn't really sit with me. The one positive with her treatment was that actually she did do a kind of mitochondrial function test, which was pretty expensive actually. But one thing that it did help with is that it did show there was an impairment. I don't know whether if I had a test now, it might show there was still an impairment, and yet I'm now running 4 times a week or 5 times a week. But what was interesting is that it showed that my ability to produce and recycle ATP and ADP respectively was impaired. It was very low.
Yeah.
So that basically did give me a bit of a kind of boost, because it kind of did say that there was something wrong. It was almost like an outcome measure to say, well, actually, you're not functioning as well as you could. So that was quite useful. But the dietary stuff never really kind of got anywhere. It just didn't. I felt like I maybe had a little bit of a boost. That might have been psychosomatic. I think probably with the exercise that I was adapting, yoga, and I was putting much more effort into kind of walking, doing lots of walks and things. And I was kind of less frustrated about the exercise. There was more of an acceptance of where I think that actually helped a lot, because I was kind of starting to progress in that sense in terms of low level exercise, kind of more of an understanding and acceptance of where I was at, and trying new things like yoga, and just developing my own kind of, I used to be a personal trainer. I was a physio. I was trying to think realistically about what I could do to kind of generate recovery in the body. And there's a lot of evidence to show that if you do resistance training, this can boost mitochondria function.
Right.
So, and the benefit with it is that you can do maybe a set of 15 or whatever it is you're doing, and then have a rest for 3 minutes. So it's not that constant exercise where you're having to kind of. So I think those things were helping. I was probably at this point. So this is, where are we now? We're probably at like 2016, late 2016. I was probably kind of 60% better. So I was kind of managing day-to-day living, but I couldn't exercise. I couldn't go running. I tried it a few times, and I still didn't have that ability to kind of do regular exercise. I suppose at that point I'd kind of accepted, or was starting to doubt whether I would run again. Because I would look at pictures of kind of marathons and fell races in the Lake District and think, well, something doesn't really add up here. Why was I able to do that before? Run up a mountain, or parts of it, you're not always running up it, but either way, get to the top of a mountain, and run for 10, 15 miles. And now I can't. I can basically go and do a 20 minute jog and feel rough for 3 days, like really kind of whacked out. It just never really kind of, I never really could kind of work that out in terms of a logical kind of train of thought, or strain of thought. I just couldn't really understand that. But I was making gradual progress. I was kind of, the brain fog was easing at times. I'd have days where I'd kind of feel more normal. So things were kind of heading in the right direction, but I was kind of stuck. I didn't really know that, I tried the NHS. I kind of had some success with it, but hadn't really got me anywhere. I'd tried privately in this kind of really focused approach on diet and supplements. I mean, I'd been taking supplements for a long time and spending quite a lot of money on them, and I didn't feel that had really, I wasn't really getting any answers from it in terms of, and so there was always these questions. And obviously, being a physio and being a former personal trainer, and being much more science in my thoughts. I did an arts degree initially, but I'm much more scientific in how I think and looking at things. There was still, I hadn't really come across a reason as to why my my function was impaired. I mean, I will add that I've never been in a position where I was kind of, confined to the bed. I've always been able to walk around. So whether you kind of mark that as a kind of high functioning fatigue, I'm not sure. But even when I was walking around, I would often feel have terrible brain fog, muscle ache, post-exertional nausea, and then all the kind of stuff that goes with that just feeling pretty crap from being run down day in, day out, and the kind of mood that goes with that. So I'd got to a point where I'd kind of had improved a little bit, but I still wasn't able to really exercise, and I'd still have these kind of bouts of brain fog and things like that. So,
and how was it affecting, for instance, your social life?
So when I first moved down to London, and certainly for a long time, I rarely went out. I didn't really go out because I just didn't have the energy. I just physically did not have the energy to go out and go to pubs. I mean, I couldn't really drink much anyway, because that was another side effect of, I had kind of, it would just, I had alcohol intolerance because it just made me feel worse. And the hangovers would be twice as bad. And I just didn't really have the energy to kind of go out and socialize, really, because I would kind of need to come in and just recover. And I think also mentally, in terms of my mood, I just didn't really want to, because I thought, well, I'm in such a kind of low ebb that actually I just can't really be bothered. I mean, socially, my participation with the running club, even though I'd rejoined coming down, I couldn't do anything with them. I did go to the pub on a Tuesday night because they meet up on a Tuesday, and that was kind of nice for a little bit to kind of, chat to people and be amongst people. But actually, after a while, it gets pretty tedious sitting with runners who are talking about running when you're not running, and also it's boring to tell people why you're not running. So it's easier just to say, well, I've got a knee injury, and they say, all right, fine, great. Actually saying, well, because you might look and sound normal. So actually it's boring for them, and it gets pretty boring for you to explain why you're not running. I mean, some people, like close friends, were obviously very interested to hear, the signs and symptoms. So, it affected me in terms of, socializing. It affected me in terms of what I enjoy doing, which was obviously running. It had profound effects day to day. I mean, I was kind of existing. Yeah. And obviously I'd kind of got to the point where I'd put up kind of mental barriers where I just kind of assumed, well, I used to start saying things like, well, I used to run. When people would say, oh, I see clients at work, in outpatients, and they'd say, oh, do you run? Or colleagues would say, and I say, well, yeah, I used to run marathons and half. I was talking about it in the past tense, as if it was a life that I had, that I possibly wouldn't get back to. I mean, I was kind of, by that point, I was obviously very accepting of where I was. I'd gone through the kind of pissed off phase where I'd see people out running and think, how come they're able to do it and why aren't I? But I just kind of got to the point where I just thought, well, I can't really do it. I'm possibly not going to get back to it. Who knows, really? I suppose there was a glimmer of hope in that I felt like I was getting a little bit better, to a degree, as in I was having some normal days at work where I didn't feel too bad. And then obviously as time went by, I was able to do a little bit more socializing and go out and meet people. But really for the first 6 months when I moved to London, I just didn't see anyone at all. And even for the second 6 months, I saw people. It probably wasn't until the summer where I started to kind of go out and do things, really.
Right. Okay.
And it was then after that, as I kind of picked up a little bit, obviously I was able to kind of start to socialize more. But, London is tiring anyway.
Yeah.
And then if you've got a busy job and then you throw in some kind of fatigue related condition, it's not really conducive to kind of wanting to do much, because by the time you've done a day's work, got on the tube, got in, had a cup of tea, you think, oh Christ, I can't really do anything else.
Yeah. Okay. And just going back to the point you made earlier, what's interesting to me is obviously someone watching this who is, very restricted in terms of being either bedbound or spending a lot of time resting. That's a very different experience to your experience. However, I do work with people who across the spectrum, from people who are literally bedbound to people who are working, but that's all they're doing, and they can't, they're not living a normal life in that. They work, they come home, they recover, they spend the whole evening, the whole weekend recovering so they can actually go back to work on Monday. So it sounds like it was still, impacting your life, although that's a very different experience to someone who might be at that other end of the spectrum.
Oh, completely. And this is why when I speak to people, when we talk about recovery, I was like, well, I can't compare myself to the next person, because the next person might not be able to go to the bathroom and wash themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful about that. I think, on the flip side, I think part of my physical ability probably enabled me to do more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So actually, just coming from a kind of marathon background, I kind of probably just hauled myself through a lot of it. And actually, whereas I never had any kind of debilitating fatigue, which really stopped me completely from leaving the house or anything. I wrote down all the symptoms I used to have. I remember being on holiday, even in 2016 in Cornwall for my stepdad's 60th. I couldn't go in the water because it just had the water was just too cold. I had a terrible ability to deal with temperature, fluctuations in temperature.
Yeah.
Every morning I was waking up around then, I'd have just this horrible kind of I can only describe it as a kind of poisoned feeling, which you'd have in the morning and then would kind of ease through the morning into lunchtime. Terrible brain fog. So even though on the spectrum I probably wasn't hugely impaired compared to someone who was seriously affected, I felt I was pretty impaired. I mean, I had some if you've got nausea, muscle ache, kind of poison feeling and brain fog day in, day out, that's quite hard to deal with on a kind of, succession of weeks and months. Admittedly, it would fluctuate in levels. So that was very, very debilitating. But like I said, I'm very careful not to say, what I've done is the kind of way to do it, because clearly everybody is different and everyone will have a different level of impairment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what happened next? What was?
So I actually, through a friend of mine, was obviously, was chatting random, saying she was asking me about my running or whatever. It was a kind of, I say, not a close friend, but someone I know through Facebook. And she had mentioned a friend of hers who had, by all accounts, been quite severely affected by kind of fatigue, ME, CFS, and had actually had some treatment with yourself. And so she actually put me in touch with her. And this is actually, I think this had probably been quite a while ago, prior to actually having any treatment with yourself. But we'd spoken about, how I was, and she told me about her ongoing recovery and what she'd done. And obviously she was then talking about the whole stress response, and had given me, some insight into some stuff to read, and pointed me in the right direction of a few bits and pieces, some articles and the rest of it. And so that I was like, oh, right, okay. And then she obviously said, well, there's this report you can read, which you might find interesting. It's it kind of resonated with me. It might not with you, but, if you go on, your website or whatever, there's this report you can read and have a read of it. Like it made perfect sense to me. And I didn't for about 4 months or whatever it was. I can't remember how long it was. I kind of just didn't get around to it. I don't know why. And then actually, I read the report, and a lot of it made perfect sense, in the sense that a lot of the answers that I was looking for that I hadn't had from the NHS, and the the private healthcare with this ecological doctor, it kind of seemed to answer the questions that I'd struggled to kind of work out myself. There's kind of, well, what's actually causing this? I used to run up this mountain or go for a 10-mile run. Now I can't. What's actually causing this physically? I've looked at all this mitochondria and nutrients and blah, 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 but there's still this unanswered question. And actually, I was aware that I'd been under huge amounts of stress, probably for a long time. So gradually the penny started to drop. And obviously when I read your report, that kind of thing started to fall into place, that, all right, well, maybe this is all right. I'm slowly getting better, but actually maybe this might be it kind of makes sense. So I was very intrigued by it. And I thought, the kind of stress response and energy function and production and recovery made perfect sense to me. It kind of slotted in, and I thought, well, I've tried this. Logically, this, it kind of makes sense, and clearly other people have found it works. So there's got to be something in it.
Right. Okay. And so you got in touch.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No. So obviously I got in touch, and we did the initial kind of consultations, and we talked, obviously spoke about feeling calm and how often was I feeling calm and relaxed and positive thoughts. And, it became pretty evident, within the first session or so that, I can't remember, we've got the numbers written down somewhere, but, a high percentage of the time I was having negative thoughts or ruminating on negative aspects of day-to-day living and how I was feeling. And, probably 20% of the time I was feeling calm. So I was like, okay, well, so that immediately discussing that made me realize, right, well, this is obviously, we're onto something here, because clearly if I might be getting a tiny bit better, but I'm still nowhere near to recovering. And it was when we started talking about, the unhelpful skills and behaviors, thinking negatively about things, constantly analyzing how you're feeling. Am I doing this? What happens if I do this? Basically, I was just never recovering. I wasn't giving myself any time to recover. And so I was, there was just this constant underlying stress that was, wearing me down basically, or more to the point, preventing any recovery. And clearly that was both about, that was mainly about my condition, but then it clearly realized, through various, treatment sessions, that actually there was a kind of anxiety element possibly with work as well. And that therefore thinking of, that was a kind of spin-off, that thinking about stressful aspects of work all the time was actually making the condition worse as well. So it was a kind of two-pronged thing. And I think, as we moved into that first session, and that was really where I started to really kind of make a huge jump in terms of recovery, because I remember, and I think there's always a point where you think, right, okay, I'm definitely onto something now, because I went out for a walk and I didn't think about anything negative. I just went for a walk. I wasn't thinking about, well, what's the repercussions of this? Am I going to feel run down? Or, because I just thought, well, I'll just go for a walk. I'll walk up to Highgate, I'll go for a long walk. And I just felt calm for the first time in a while. I just felt relaxed, not thinking about, well, what happens if I walk too far? How long am I going to be, run down for? Not doing that whole kind of cycle. And I think that was a key point, even though it wasn't a run, it was actually ironically a walk, which probably, was starting to get me back on the right track. And then the whole aspect we discussed about, well, you've shown that you can recover. So, if you're a little bit run down for a few days, you'll just bounce back, and you just have to build things gradually. But I think cutting out the negative thoughts, the unhelpful thoughts about work or thinking about feeling run down, as soon as I could start to identify those and kind of nip them in the bud as they started, like within probably, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks, I was starting to notice like significant changes, as in just feeling more energized day to day, feeling more rested at the end of the day. My sleep was improving. And it was quite strange, because you kind of rationalize it with people. I remember telling my family, and it sounded so obvious, to be honest. It sounded like really straightforward. It's actually not an easy thing to do at the start, because if for years you've been kind of thinking in one way, so that, for example, where I am here, I walk up to Highgate Woods, up through Highgate Woods up to the station. If for, God knows how long, that walk had been filled with negative thoughts, actually just doing a walk up to Highgate Tube Station and just looking around and enjoying the woods, it was it was a transition. So you have to get used to a way of thinking. And actually that was, whereas I had the kind of quick reward in terms of feeling better, that was also quite hard, because you almost have the kind of new mind and the old mind. But it was really once I kind of started to analyze those and pick out those kind of negative thoughts and not thinking about repercussions so much, and kind of just living a bit more. And this will sound odd to people who were maybe in my situation when I was run down. They think, well, what does this mean? Just not think negatively. But actually, I just started to feel more calm. Right. And I think obviously with that, I think the body then started to restore energy supplies. So I then literally had more energy reserve. And then obviously from that, I then started to do walk jogging, because, like I'd go out for like a walk and then I'd intersperse that with just jog for a little bit. And started to work and just kind of went from there. I mean, I had setbacks along the way, but I think that was the real kind of key. Not worrying so much about being run down, and kind of giving myself more of a chance to recover. And not putting pressure on myself, and kind of just starting to think, okay, and accepting that there would be times where I'd feel a bit more run down, but actually you just think, well, I'll just rest a little bit. And actually the first few times that had happened, and then obviously I'd recovered and been able to go back to doing a little bit more exercise, that started to break the cycle, because then I started to be able to tell myself, well, actually you can recover from this. You can actually go out and do a little bit and not be fearful of kind of any symptoms that actually, oh no, I'm back to square one, blah, blah, because actually I could see that I was improving. And that actually, and also had an effect in my, I was kind of more relaxed at work as well. So yeah, so I think from that I really started to, I wasn't going out and running 10 miles or anything, but I was actually able to exercise. I was able to go for long walks without any repercussions, and I was starting to do walk jogs, and then fairly rapidly I got up to kind of running, 20 minutes, just at a very easy, like a jog pace.
Yeah.
But actually that was kind of, it was like a eureka moment, really.
And when was that? What was the time line?
So guys, it's hard to remember now. So I would say, so we started treatment would have been April last year, so about a year ago.
Yeah.
I would say that by probably early June, middle of June, I was kind of starting to do, like probably end of May, early June, I was doing walk jogging.
Yeah.
And then probably by the end of June, I was starting to do kind of short, easy run. End of June, early July. So April, May, June. So like 3 months after I saw you, I was starting to do more progressive exercise at a very low level, very low intensity. But I was actually running, and I wasn't getting any delayed fatigue.
Right.
So I wasn't getting any brain fog. I wasn't getting any nausea. But like I said, I previously tried doing this, and I feel terrible for 4 days.
Yeah.
It was a distinct kind of pattern.
Yeah.
And part of the thing was to not worry about that kind of cycle anymore, and start to think, okay, well, you might feel a little bit tired for a few days. So not only was I able to do more, I was more relaxed about the process as well.
Yeah.
I was just kind of living in the moment, as opposed to kind of analyzing everything that might or might not happen as a result of going for a 15-minute jog.
Yeah.
I kind of stopped making it this huge kind of, event. Just like, well, I'll go for 15 minutes and I might be fine afterwards. And if I'm a bit tired, I just won't run for a little bit. And so gradually, that's how I kind of built it up slowly. So, but there were setbacks along the way. In the months after April, it wasn't all plain sailing. You have times where you drop back into your old self and you start overthinking things or panicking about things, and anxiety would go up. Have I pushed it too hard? But you could always kind of bring yourself back, because I knew that I was kind of starting to improve. And I suppose this can be related to people at all levels. Just obviously my aim was to get back running, and get back running, long runs and running up in the Lake District. But it's effectively the same principle that can be applied to someone who might just want to walk to the shops and back. There's just various stages of recovery.
Yeah.
Not everyone wants to get back running, of course.
Yeah. And I'm very interested in what you're saying, because for me, when I had ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, it was a light bulb moment to actually realize that I was generating a lot of stress as a result of being unwell. In my personal case, I think being a bit of a worrier, being someone who generated anxiety, was probably a trait before I got sick. Now, there's going to be people who hear that and totally resonate and say, oh, yeah, that's what I do. But there's going to be other people, I know from comments on other videos, who are going to say, well, it sounds like maybe you didn't have MECFS, you just had anxiety and stress, and that was what it was. What would your response to that be?
I mean, I can only speak from my own personal situation. I think, both as someone who had a tendency to worry a lot, probably like yourself, you talked about yourself worrying, and then kind of social activity, and then health. There was a situation, a stressful environment that I was generating, and that then also lifestyle and education was generating, and then obviously throw in exercise. So I realized, looking back, that actually I was probably kind of creating the perfect environment for something like this to happen, looking back. So I suppose it's difficult, because you can only look at yourself and say, well, this is how I was, and in hindsight it makes perfect sense that I ended up how I did, really. It's completely kind of for the next person, they may be able to change their diet as I did and completely resolve their symptoms. And I think that's where the conundrum is with this. There possibly isn't there's not a one size fits all approach, but I think the key is ultimately, if you really look at things, and that might be that actually you need to speak to someone else to say, well, are you actually stressed? I mean, people will know one way or the other whether they are really stressed. They might have to dig a little bit, but are they a worrier? Are they generating unnecessary stress? Do they go through life day to day? How stressful is work? What's the family situation like? Do they get wound up, futile frustrations? Do they get wound up about stuff that doesn't really matter? What's the friendship? There's all sorts of stressors. And so ultimately someone may think watching this, well, I'm not really stressed. If you do a little bit of digging, you can actually work out, well, maybe you are quite stressed, but by the same regard, on the flip side, there may be people who genuinely aren't that stressed, but have some kind of fatigue related condition and can resolve it with kind of types of exercise and diet. I just think that the stress link is too great and too obvious a link between the two, though, to kind of discount. It completely, by dealing with it in my case, I think if I hadn't dealt with the impact of stress, I may have recovered at some point, but I may have been in the same boat at like 60%, where I could kind of function day to day and was able to socialize a bit and do my job, but basically was never really recovering fully. I might have been in that situation for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Who knows? I don't believe I would ever have broken the circle and recovered to where I am had I not dealt with the stress. With the stress cycle, I just don't believe I would have got better. I think I would still be here in 2 to 3 years, possibly wondering, well, I'm a little bit better. I have good or bad days, and I've spoken to people since. Some people who've contacted me, some runners. I've been referred a couple of runners. People have said, because they know that I've recovered and I run. And you do speak to people sometimes, and or you hear of people. I hear of people in my job. I don't obviously talk to them about it really because I'm doing a consultation, and you get that sense that there are people out there who are kind of stuck and they don't really know where to go, and they may or may not find a way. But you almost speak to people and you realize that they probably haven't made that link between the impact that stress has on day-to-day living and energy production and recovery. And unfortunately, it's kind of a little bit sad in some situations where you look at some people and think, well, they may never break this barrier because they've never really kind of, it's never been, then maybe they're not aware of it, or maybe it's never been made aware to them. I think it sometimes takes someone else to say, well, actually, how relaxed are you, or how do you feel? And actually, I don't, when they actually look at it in a different way, they might realize.
I think you're right, because I think some people, I don't think I really fully understood the impact that stress was having on my well-being, and it was a major factor. In terms of me getting sick, and dealing with it was a major factor in me, getting better from MECFS. So let's just bring it up to the here and now. So what's life like now? Just paint a picture for people watching.
It's pretty good. I can do my job without any kind of ill effects. I mean, it's a pretty draining job at times, talking to people about pain all day and, how's your pain? Oh, not great. So that's quite heavy going. I work in outpatients at the moment. So it's very, very quick succession, high turnover of patients, taking on a lot of kind of emotional stuff. I can do that without any issues. I get no brain fog whatsoever, rather. Physically, I sleep better. I'm back up to running probably 3 times a week sometimes. I'm back up to running. I can run up to 12, 13 miles on a Sunday.
Right.
I've done. I don't get me wrong. I've built this up slowly. I've just gone back to. I've done a couple of fell races in the Lake District recently, which was always a goal of mine. Obviously, we spoke about that. I did 2 of them. The first one was, both were pretty hard, but they're never easy when you're fully fit. So physically, I'm completely fully fit. I'm completely fully resolved. I have no lasting effects whatsoever. All I'd say I have now is kind of normal fatigue. I get more tired now and then. I have stressful days. I'm probably just, ironically, I'm just more aware of how to deal with day-to-day stress, having had a fatigue-related condition. So I probably would have rather not been ill for 3 years. And all the rest of it prior to that. But in actual fact, in a kind of ironic twist, it's actually done me a favor in some ways, because it's made me enjoy things, appreciate things in a different way. I'm more aware of how I am living day to day. I don't get stressed about silly things. Occasionally you kind of catch yourself thinking, oh, hang on. You think, well, I shouldn't be worried about that. I'm just more positive. I'm kind of back doing, running is what I do, what I enjoy doing in some form. It's been part of what I do. And therefore, when I wasn't able to do it, I kind of lost part of myself. And in fact, my family used to say, that's just how we know you. And so it was very difficult for a while, because I kind of lost everything about what I do. I wasn't involved in, but actually now I'm back doing that. I'm involved. I'm back running on the fells and the lakes. I'm doing a 10K race on Sunday. I might not run hard because it's going to be too hot, but I'm out socializing. I basically can do what I want. And that's going from someone who basically 3 years ago wasn't able to walk kind of 30, 40 minutes without feeling pretty rubbish, really. And certainly wasn't able to run in any capacity whatsoever. And so it's obviously physically, it's had a great effect, in terms of what I can do. But actually, that's been a kind of catalyst to kind of improve how I feel day to day, because obviously I'm more relaxed about things and I've got more physical resilience to deal with the rigors of like a job. And, dealing with the tube and being just day-to-day work, So, it's like a full turnaround, complete turnaround. It's taken time. It's taken a lot of patience. It's taken obviously lots of different kind of involvement from different people. And even when I was on the right track, I still had to work hard at the right amounts of exercise. It wasn't just handed over. It wasn't like, right, and a lot of kind of mental resilience, talking myself around in terms of situations where I'd kind of go back into the old way of thinking. So it's taken a lot of hard work and patience. But I'm completely resolved. And I don't really have any fears about any kind of future relapse, just simply for the fact that I'm more careful about resting. The kind of lifestyle that I was leading, I've kind of eradicated in terms of that's kind of social input.
So you're talking about the burning the candle.
I don't really do that. And I'm kind of more relaxed about exercise. I mean, I like fell running, which obviously would sound idiotic to a lot of people running up and down mountains. But, actually it's kind of, if I want to go for a run, I'll go for a run. If I'm tired, I'll just stay at home and have a pizza. I don't kind of overanalyze it like I used to. I'm not kind of driven to kind of go out and, go out and exercise every day. So I think I'm just much more relaxed and positive now. Really.
Yeah, good. So, well, great. It's really great to hear your story and to hear sort of some of the elements of, what you think's helped you. Any final thoughts? Any tip you'd give anyone watching this video?
I wrote some down actually, because you often forget these. Give yourself time to recover. I think that's always a key. Try not to overanalyze everything. Imagine the time that you can spend overanalyzing everything. You'd be amazed at how much more relaxing things are if you just come in and have a cup of tea. And try not to analyze everything. Appreciate the things you can do. So you might compare yourself to how you were before, but there are still things that you can do which you can be positive about. Try new things. I mean, if you are physically able to, or I started doing yoga, for example. That was a great help. Never used to do it. I only started to do it because obviously I was run down. And I think a big one as well is don't tell everyone everything about your condition, because what can often happen with that is not only can you, and don't get me wrong, you've got close friends and family and whoever partners you can confide in, whatever the case may be. But actually, I found myself going often into a kind of, people would say, "Oh, how are you?" "Oh, well, I'm not too bad." And you'd go into this whole kind of, dialogue, of kind of negative dialogue,
yeah.
which sparks off stress for you and basically balls the pants off someone else. Sometimes that situation is very useful, but you need to just be a bit careful about who you tell and when you tell, because you can kind of start to be overly negative without realizing it. But yeah, just give yourself a bit of a chance, and you might be surprised at what you can do if you look at your condition in a slightly different way, and give yourself a bit of a chance. And if you start to relax and kind of have that kind of calm approach, maybe things will follow and you'll surprise yourself.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Rob, thanks for sharing your story.
Problem.
It's been really great to hear, and it's been great to hear of your progress and see some of those pictures of you running in the fells. So thanks very much. Good luck with everything, and it's been great to talk to you.
No problems. Thanks very much.
Bye for now.